Hi there. Welcome back to the Real Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in this week's very special episode, we're going to be talking about a little movie called Dune Part Two.
This is a very special episode. We talked about the first Dune, basically 3 years ago now, I think.
2021.
This is the second part of the Dune adaptation by Denis Villeneuve. The first one, 2021? Everybody loved it, right? We loved it.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember what we rated it. Maybe we'll reveal that later on when we talk about ratings for part two. But this is like a hotly anticipated movie. Got pushed back a couple times. It got moved around. Like it had a late 2023 release. It got moved around there. And then we had a writers and actors strike.
Yeah.
And they opted to push it back to 2024 in March, which is when we're recording this. We're kind of both fresh off of viewing this in theaters. And I'm kind of excited, but also a little nervous of talking about this movie. I think that first episode we did on the first Dune was really good. I haven't listened to it in a little while, but it was like, it was fun. And it's like, there's expectation on this movie to be as good as the first one. There's expectation on this podcast to be as good as the first one, our first episode of it.
No.
Very, very.
Brian, we must recite the litany against hype. Hype is the mind killer. No, hype is the expectation killer. I must not hype. So yeah, we're gonna come in this with like clear expectation, like no burden of expectation, just like watching the second movie, no burden of expectation. We're just gonna go in, we're gonna have a good time, talk about the movie, what we enjoyed, what we didn't enjoy, comparisons to the book adaptation, or comparisons to the book adaptations they made in the movie. I think that's really interesting. It's always an interesting conversation to see when you're translating stories across media, to see kind of what works and what doesn't. But yeah, there's all kinds of ins and outs and all kinds of great conversation surrounding this movie.
So there's two things I just wanted to mention before we jump into the main feature discussion. One, Apple Podcasts has started doing transcriptions in their episodes. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, I think the transcriptions are just available to you. I'm also going to rip those out and plop them onto our website, realfilmchronicles.com. It doesn't really differentiate between speakers. So it doesn't say like, hey, this is speaker one, or this is Brian, or this is Nathan talking, but all the text is kind of there. So it's at least a neat way to follow along, is I think even when I was playing with it, you could sort of select the text that you're reading and then actually just go like press play and it goes directly to that spot in the podcast, which was kind of neat. The second aspect is one that we always throw out there, is that we'll be discussing spoilers without abandon throughout the episode. So consider this your spoiler warning. And you mentioned the book comparison. Would it be safe to say we'll talk about what happened in the book and compared to the movie? Like, if you haven't read the book, do we want to spoil it that much, or does it even matter at this point? I mean, the book's been around for...
I'm only going to talk about, really I want to touch on, there's a couple key differences, so I'm not going to go into detail about the book. But there are a couple key differences that we need to address in talking about the plot of Dune 2.
Effectively,
Dune Part 2.
In my mind, if you've watched Dune Part 2, you've kind of spoiled the book for yourself.
All the major plot beats are there. All the major plot points
all
are
the
there.
major plot beats. There's going to be minor little differences here and there, but it's like generally you know what's going on. So we might bring it up. Since watching the first Dune, I did finish reading the first Dune book.
Nice.
It's been a couple years now, so my details on that are a little fuzzy. And you've gone further. You've read most of the series, Frank Herbert's original 6.
Yeah,
right?
I just have to read Chapter House Dune, which was the last one that he wrote before he passed. From what I understand, it's almost like he started a new trilogy and he didn't quite get to finish it. So it kind of almost ends on like a bit of a cliffhanger. But yeah, the original 6 like books that Frank Herbert wrote is really like, that's like the core of the Dune universe. And then his son Brian Herbert took over and wrote a bunch more stories in that universe. But really, I think the 6 core books are really that makes up Dune really. The heart of Dune, I should say. I don't want to disenfranchise fans of Brian Herbert's work here.
Everything I've read says his work is garbage.
Yeah, ditto. I was trying to be nice about it though, Brian.
Honestly, it's probably like kind of nice if you're really into the Dune, you've read the main series a couple times, you probably are going to venture into his work. But I think he works with different fantasy authors as well to continue it on. But in any event, we're not talking about all that stuff. We got to get into the movie here. Like this movie, we're talking about expectations. The expectation on this was pretty big, but
huge.
Keep in mind here, the first movie came out basically in the pandemic. It saw a day-and-day release with digital streaming. So the theatrical run was I think lessened because of that. The run up to this movie, it's theater only. It's filmed entirely in a larger IMAX aspect ratio. Like the anticipation, the expectation for this movie to look gorgeous and be a huge film was definitely there. And a week and a half after release, it seems to be there. Critics, audiences are loving it. The box office, people are going out to see this, which is kind of nice to see people going out to watch sci-fi. Because a lot of the times these movies don't necessarily do that well.
And to watch something that's a bit more cerebral and there's action beats, of course, in this, but Dune is the story so dense thematically. I'm talking about everything from politics to religion to philosophy to society. There's so many different things going on in the books, and even kind of the streamlined version in the movies. They're still so dense, and so much of that stuff is still maintained. So to have something that cerebral, pulling that viewership, I think in the first couple of weeks they've almost outperformed their entire theatrical run of the original Dune, or they're getting close to it.
Yes.
So it's definitely it's picking up steam. So it's great to see.
So right off the bat, did this movie meet your expectations?
I can't say that it did. I would have to say it exceeded my expectations. Oh. See what I did there?
All right.
No, it was everything I thought it was going to be and more. I mean, so one thing going through, in my experience, if there's a movie adaptation of a book, typically if I read the book first, the movie somehow always doesn't seem to live up to the original book, or I seem to be more disappointed in the movie version.
Yeah.
And usually the other way, if I watch the movie first and read the book, it doesn't have the same effect on the book. I can love them both. So coming out of Dune Part Two, I was kind of faced with that dilemma again, but really, watching it and thinking about it, really Dune Part Two was a turning point for me in my appreciation of simultaneously appreciating the movie and book versions. And it happened through random. I was browsing through the movies subreddits and people discussing the movie, and somebody made a point. I don't know why it stuck with me this time, but all the changes in the movie, made sense in translating to that medium, and anything that it kind of left out or changed. You have the original book, you still have the original book, right? You have the original source material, so you have both versions to enjoy. It's okay, that hit me. I don't know why that was just a mundane random statement by some Reddit user. And I was like, okay, yeah, I was able to make peace. And I was like, yeah, I enjoy the movie for that version of the story, and I still have the book, and I can enjoy that version for that version of the story. But honestly, all the changes that Denis Villeneuve made in the story and the plot and the characters actually made perfect sense. It was almost, in a way, like if Frank Herbert had a more strict editor and helped him to streamline the story, and this is what it kind of would have come out with, because really he gets down to fundamentally, there's a bunch of different themes and sub themes going on in Dune, but there's one theme kind of running throughout that Denis really latches onto, and I think shows that he really was a fan of the source material, really was a fan of the books, and really distilled this down to its distilled Dune down to its very essence thematically, and so all the plot kind of follow from supporting that theme. So yeah, it was incredibly well done for an unfilmable novel. Denis Villeneuve kind of, made an incredible film out of an unfilmable novel. So it was pretty amazing. How about you? What were your first impressions seeing this movie, Brian?
Yeah, I was pretty blown away. I think I still fell under the influence of the book and looking for these elements of the book that
Sure.
maybe weren't there in the movie. And initially, I'm walking away and be like, "Oh, did I misremember something, or why didn't they put this in here?" But I mean, I'm a big advocate of these properties, like the formats can live on their own, and they are their own thing, right? And
Exactly.
I think,
Exactly.
like, to give a story, way back when Jurassic Park came out, like '93, my dad got me the book and actually read the book. I think before I saw the movie, like I blasted through it. I was so eager to get through it, and there were entire sequences in that book that were never in the first Jurassic Park movie. They were like there's a pterodactyl scene that was held off for the third movie. And I was like initially confused and kind of disappointed back then. And then I think I came to realize at a young age, it's like, oh, they are different things.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't necessarily have to be a perfect adaptation. And maybe it's better because of that, because they're different formats. Like, it's a different medium.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. You have to kind of realize, like, some things that work really well in a book do not translate well on screen, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Sometimes something that works well in a visual medium just doesn't, if you translate one for one to a book form, just doesn't work that well, right? So watching it from that perspective, I was like, yeah, all the changes in my mind, and we'll go through a couple of the big ones, made perfect sense in the context of translating this for the big screen and really being aware of that medium in a way that maybe the 1984 version of Dune wasn't.
So seeing this on the big screen, I was excited. I ended up watching the 2021, the first part, twice in the past month before watching this one. And I really grew to like that. I think I gave it 4.5 stars, honestly, that first movie, because it felt like it was the first part of it. Wasn't like a complete film.
It was the first half of the story. Yep.
I started to appreciate that first part more and more, to the point where I felt the opposite effect here, where it was like, oh, we're just getting like just nonstop stuff going on, and we're not taking it slow like we did the first one to like really build up the characters. So I was initially like kind of let down from a couple different angles, but the more and more I think about this, like I'm gonna go see this again in theaters like soon. I want to get like that experience going on. I really love this movie. I like reading about some of the differences, and I appreciate what they did for the movie to like keep it in that movie medium and make it its own consistent, comprehensive, and just like his own vision. Right.
100%.
And you, like, as you said, like you could tell he's a fan of the original source material. It was just so good. And this is sci-fi. Like, I like sci-fi. I don't go out of my way to see a lot of it. The stuff is so good. I love so much stuff in this movie. Like, the world building they do is so awesome. And it's like, when we first talked about Dune Part 1 in our podcast episode, I hadn't read the book yet. And I feel like I was just learning more and more, where it's like there was hints of the greater world.
Yeah.
And you were able to fill in those details where it's just like, oh, why, like this is part of that. And it's like, oh, there's just little hints of everything going on here. This one, we get even more of that. Like, we get to see more of that Harkonnen homeworld. Yeah. And like some of their rituals and things. You're like, oh, this is a whole society here, a whole like human colony that's just like, this is what's going on over here. Like, why is their planet happening? Black and white? Like, you know, it's just,
who cares? It looks awesome.
It looks awesome. It's just like, but it was just so neat. Like, everything was so neat. And even at the end of the movie, where I think the warships from the other houses were showing up, and be like, I don't think we've talked about the other houses at all during this movie. What are their deal? Like, I want to know more and more about this. It's like, they left me begging for a third movie. Like, that couldn't come soon enough after watching this movie. So this movie, it definitely, like, it wowed me. It floored me. It was awesome. It was a fun experience seeing this in theater. It was just really satisfying to like get what feels like the second part of maybe a trilogy now. And
fingers crossed.
It did finish roughly around the same spot as the book, for what I remember. So It's like, it's still one story, but it's like, it teases you with so much more. It leaves you wanting more, and I love it.
Well, really, to set aside maybe some spoilers, I won't get into extreme details, but really like Dune and Dune Messiah. Dune Messiah is the second book in the series, but really you read those two together and that feels almost like here's a complete story, or really Paul's complete story, right? So like there have been rumblings. I think Denis has hinted at this, that he would like to make a third Dune movie based on Dune Messiah to kind of round out the trilogy and really finish off Paul Atreides' story or Paul Muad'Dib's story. And I think that would, I think for anybody out there who's read Dune Messiah, you know what I'm talking about in terms of like both the theme and the plot. Like Dune Messiah is a perfect companion piece to Dune. It feels like a complete story. So it would be, unless this is like Abed's worst timeline from Community, then I'm hopeful that we're going to get that third Dune movie. Especially with Denis Villeneuve being the fan that he is, and being obviously, with the work that was put into this movie, like obviously he's invested in the movie, on a personal level. So really, really hoping to see, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but we're hoping to see that third movie in the trilogy. But like to your point, Brian, I wanted to say, this is a movie, like, do yourself a favor, go see this on the big screen. This is one of those movies that really does benefit. And I really wish I would have seen or been able to see Dune 1 on the big screen. I'm kicking myself a little bit now. I think I missed it because it was kind of in the middle of the pandemic.
If it had a very short re-release of like, here in my town, was here for like a weekend in the IMAX format, and I managed to squeeze it in. I didn't even know it was coming. I had a friend message me at the last minute. It was just like, we got to go see Dune in theaters. I'm like, that's right now? That's happening? Let's go. Drop everything.
Yeah, Brian's calling. So yeah, if Brian's boss is listening, that's why he had to call in sick last week. Yeah. But no, like this reminded me, like, Dune 1 and 2 reminded me a lot of the Green Knights visually, in just like every frame of Dune. Both Dune movies could be a painting you hang up on your wall. Just every shot was just so beautifully composed, so beautifully crafted. The lighting, the set design, the composition of how the characters and different elements were framed together. I mean, it's just a beautiful, beautiful movie to look at. And there were honestly some moments where I was getting like chills down my spine. There were a couple moments, even though I knew it was coming. I'd read the books, like, okay, I'm waiting for this to come. And like when it finally came, like when Paul finally kind of embraces his role as the son Al-Gaib, the foretold, the wrongly foretold Messiah of the Fremen, and he gets up on stage and he's giving a speech. There's like silence, and a couple of the Fremen stand up, and he's like, using his powers to prove that he's the Messiah. And it's like, there was just chills down my spine watching that on the big screen. It was amazingly well done. So like, do yourself a favor, check it out on the big screen.
Without a doubt. I want to throw out, I mean, obviously Denis Villeneuve, this is his vision, like adapted. He's a master. He's one of my favorite directors. He's a master at throwing this stuff. Yeah, he's great. But he worked with cinematographer Greg Fraser, who's also done the first Dune. He's also done The Crater, which came out earlier. Oh yeah, which looked absolutely gorgeous.
Crater looked
Batman,
amazing. Yeah.
And the Batman looked drop dead gorgeous. Every frame of it. He did Rogue One, which I think is probably one of the more, I want to say, visually interesting Star Wars movies, especially when you get
Disney
into
era Star Wars movies. I'll say I'll concede that.
Yeah, definitely. Zero Dark 30, just to name another one, but like there's some serious talent here, and that's one of the things I really like about this big budget film. It has a big budget, about $180 million, I think. You can see that money on screen. You can see
every cent.
Everything was there for like his vision, and it's so consistent. It's like I didn't look at all the details of like all the special effects houses that who created what scenes. Maybe it was the same place that did everything, because I couldn't tell. It all looked consistently good. Because you watch, I mean, you mentioned Marvel. It's like the fight scenes are maybe farmed out to a different VFX company than some of the other visual effects scenes. And it's like there's a little, you can tell the difference in some of the quality. Here, I think they must have gave them the time to make it good. It's like they must have gave them the proper time to do what they need to do and make it look consistent throughout the entire film, which now, which doesn't seem like maybe such a great compliment, like 30 years ago, to make a film look consistently good. But like now, in our age of like Marvel movies, it's like, yeah, this is a big accomplishment. Hey, you have consistently good VFX throughout.
Yeah, I think I was watching an episode of Corridor Crew, maybe, or I don't know if they're specifically talking about Dune, but somebody was saying I think one of the guests was saying about how, if the director has a consistent and clear vision early on with like minimal changes, if they do the time up front to think about these things, like for example, like how they want the world to look, how they want, in this case, what does the sandworm look like? What does the still suit look like? What does, Siege Tabor look like? And you keep that, you make those decisions early in the process. You don't, and you tweak them as you go, but don't make whole cloth changes to everything. It makes the job of the special effects artists so much easier, and they can spend all that time, tweaking things and making it better instead of the director coming back halfway through and it's like, no, you know what? I want the sandworms to have 6 arms and, I want them to be, 3 times as big and be purple. And it's like, well, then we have to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch, where this one, it felt like, like Denis Villeneuve obviously had a clear vision early on before they even started filming, and so that gave the costume designers, the VFX artists, the set and production designers, gave them time to really focus in and refine that vision, and it all comes together on the screen. It's one of those movies that you think the color palette in the desert is like, well, what can you do with that? You can do a lot.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And that's it. Like there's actual real lighting in this movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Shots put in there. I saw a snippet of an interview with Dave Bautista, and he was talking about comparing some of his Marvel experiences, filming with VFX and like green and blue screens and all this compared to Dune. And I think a lot of his scenes were in Dune were like interior shots, and it wasn't a lot of blue screen. It was they built the sets.
Yeah.
They built these rooms and had actors standing in the rooms, which almost seems crazy to talk about because there's so much discussion about like they call it the volume. Basically like these giant wraparound LED screens that are like above and are all around you, and you have a group of actors like acting, and they're able to see like where they are and have like the scene, like these screens move with them.
It's like rendering the background in real time, right? It's crazy. Yeah. It's amazing technology, but it's not like you can't use it for everything all the time, right?
It has its place.
Yeah.
And they say it really suffers when you bring in a lot of, I mean, we talked about it before, I think off the podcast ages ago, where it's like, you can't run around on these sets, like these virtual sets. It's like
the
when
holodeck.
You notice people running, you're like, oh yeah, they jogged for like 3 or 4 feet before they had to stop before they're going to hit one of these screens. And one of the other negatives of it is you can't put in a lot of people. If there's 1 or 2 people, you can put them into this virtual environment. But a lot of these scenes, like you're thinking about that end sequence there, with the Emperor surrounded by people, like you have the whole cast in one room. You can't put them into a virtual screen. You have to build that room, and you have to light it properly, and everyone's in costume. It looks so good, and they can all act and look at each other. It's amazing.
Yeah, again, it's not saying that practical sets are better than CGI. It's about using them in the proper context and using them to their best effects, right? There's certain things that are better to have practical. There are certain things better to do with VFX. There's certain things you can do better with the volume setup. There's certain things you can do better on a practical set. So it's about optimizing and using what's best for the context of that scene, right? And using all those techniques together, right?
And when you have someone as talented as Villeneuve, being able to decide, like, no, not deciding. He knows when each effect, when each setting is proper for the scene that he wants to convey the story and the acting through. It's amazing. The acting. Timothée Chalamet. I always mess up. Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya. I mean, the list goes on. Rebecca Ferguson, Josh Brolin, Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, Dave Bautista, Christopher Walken. I mean, that was I was surprised to see him casted there. It was like, they need an emperor in there. He did a good job, I think. Lea Seydoux, Stellan Skarsgård, like people are back for the first one. Stilgar by Javier Bardem. Man, the amount of talent here is fantastic. Like, how do you feel about the actors? Like, is Timothée
Okay.
like?
I was thinking
this
about
guy
this last night, and there are some roles that are so iconic that you just can never think of recasting them, right? I think of like Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, or Michael J. Fox as Marty McFly. And honestly, it's a little bit recency bias, obviously, but I think like Timothée Chalamet and Paul Atreides, like, all due respect to Kyle MacLachlan, but like, to me, like Timothée Chalamet, now that's who I see when I read Dune. When I think about Paul Muad'Dib, Paul Atreides, Usul, whatever you want to call him, this is like, he embodied that role in a way that I don't know if you ever be able to recast. It's the same thing as trying to recast Indiana Jones. Like, you can't.
Yeah.
Like, he's just an actor that so embodies that role, and it's such an iconic role. Like, Dune has been an inspiration. Like, notably, Dune was a huge inspiration for Star Wars. You look at, the obviously the Bene Gesserit are a huge influence on the Jedi. Like the voice and the Force, clear through line there. So it's have like all this iconic imagery that's inspired so much, and to have him embody that role, and really in part two, to see that evolution of that character, just phenomenal. And I think Rebecca Ferguson and Zendaya, props to both of them. I think one of the great changes in the movie adaptation, especially part two, was that Chani and Jessica really felt, Chani especially, in the books, she was really just, her role was as a love interest for Paul, and that was pretty much it. In the movies, and there's been blowback about this, it's really weird to me, because like watching the movies, like, okay, now Chani feels like an actual person. She has her own motivations and her own thoughts and feelings. It feels like she has her own inner life, and she's making her own decisions, and she has agency, and she's not just there as kind of window dressing. I mean, all due respect to Frank Herbert, he wrote an incredibly amazing story that in many ways was ahead of its time. But in all honesty, like, Frank Herbert was still a man of his time, and some of the gender politics in the original Dune and the carries to the series kind of stand out. I'll put it politely, they stand out by today's standards. So having Chani be a fully fleshed out character, and like Zendaya did an amazing job. Also, side note, Zendaya, like, does she have a last name, or is she like a singer or something? And she had like a, was that just like,
she's just Zendaya? That's
Zendaya.
That's just
okay, that's just. I was just curious. I don't know about her background, but then
I'm not sure what exactly her background is. She's been acting for quite a while, but every credit is just Zendaya.
Yeah, and then Rebecca Ferguson too, Lady Jessica. She had a bit more agency in the books, but this one really, I think, fleshed out her role, and using, stoking religious zealotry and then manipulating that into a form of power, like a social power, to propel Paul and hence herself into a position of power. I thought those changes to the characters are really well done. And like Rebecca Ferguson, she's been killing it recently. I loved her in the Mission Impossible series. She's been killing it recently. Zendaya's been killing it. These are actors at the top of their game. Javier Bardem as Stilgar, who, like, Javier Bardem, like, brought, like, the character of Stilgar was surprisingly funny in this movie, unintentionally so. And there was a dark humor, because in the books, I think Paul at one point laments that Stilgar essentially became such a believer in the Lisan al-Gaib, the Messiah, and that, like, still, like, in the books, I believe Paul, like, talks about how he sees Stilgar as like he's been lessened almost, because he's given in so much to his belief, where before he was kind of more independent and more forceful. And so it's almost like in the movie as well, you get that sense of that there's this tragic downfall of, like, these people are getting so overwhelmed by their religious beliefs and their religious zealotry and going so far off the deep end that somehow, like, they're losing themselves in that, right? You really see that in Stilgar, he's funny at times. Like, there's that scene where Paul says, "Yeah, I'm not the Lisan Galliab. I'm not the savior." And then he's with like the older guys from the Southern tribe who are like the true believers. He's like, look how humble he is. Of course, the true Messiah wouldn't admit he's the Messiah. So like that taking somebody liking that. I think to Life of Brian, there's like a gag on that as well. And it's like it's humorous, but it's also like it's a dark humor, right? So there's funny bits, but it's like not like haha, like it's laugh out loud funny. I was laughing in the theater, but it's a dark humor, right?
And I think that's where like the book is able to expand more on the religion and like how far these people are going in their beliefs, where the movie doesn't really because it almost becomes the butt of the joke. And maybe it's part of the time, like our society is just like less religious now and whatnot. Right. And it's just like, we see and we're told in the movie that the Bene Gesserit have implemented, like they've incepted the society with these ideas of like the chosen one, their Messiah. Yeah. But it's just like they're engineering it to become true. And it's like, oh, we see these people and it's, I think that's where it's dark humor. It's like they're believing it, like they're devoting their lives to it. And we see the greater aspect of it, of how they're effectively kind of being tricked throughout it all. Is that right?
There's no effectively about it. It absolutely is. That's not hope. No, what you're talking about is the Missionaria Protectiva, which is the Bene Gesserit. What they do is part of their tool of tricks, or part of their bag of tricks, is they'll go to different societies, kind of undercover, and they'll plant these ideas, like political and religious ideas, so that they use it as a tool, so that essentially what they're doing is like they're pulling like an Inception, but they're like Inception on like the level of society or level of a culture. Yeah. So that if they're ever like in a situation on a planet where they're in trouble, they'll know what the local cultures and religious beliefs are, because they helped shape those religious beliefs and they helped shape those cultures. So like this idea that every culture has this messianic prophecy, right? There's this like, there's a prophecy that foretells the coming of a Messiah that's going to save our people. And it's like, oh yeah, that exists in all cultures now, because the Bene Gesserit planted that idea in every society and planted like specific ideas in every society. And you see that come into play where like literally the prophecy of the Messiah, the Lisan al-Gaib, it was planted by the Bene Gesserit, or grew out of the initial idea planted by the Bene Gesserit. So it's complete and utter nonsense. Paul knows it because he knows how the Bene Gesserit work. He figures out how they work. And Jessica obviously knows it because she's a Bene Gesserit. So the whole thing is just showing how, in keeping with that underlying theme, which I mentioned before, but I didn't actually articulate, but the underlying theme of the movie and the book itself was essentially, it was a warning against, charismatic leaders, right? But gaining so much power. Like I've seen these criticisms, some people criticizing it for being, it's perpetuating the white savior myth. It's like, no, the whole point and why Frank Herbert wrote Dune Messiah was to explicitly show people weren't picking up on the subtext of the original Dune. Is like, no, the whole thing was deconstructing the trope of this chosen one and the hero. What happens with Paul in the books? He gains power. He consolidates political power and religious power. He becomes the emperor in the movie, and he sends the Fremen out on a holy war, a jihad, a crusade. Yeah. And when you see in Dune Messiah, literally cost the lives of billions in the name of bringing peace and order and stability. He brings war and tyranny. And so like the whole movie was built around this. And you see that breakdown of, Paul. It's a tragedy in some sense, like a personal tragedy for Paul to fall down that same rabbit hole that so many other people have fallen down, but a tragedy on a social scale. So to see, Jessica and the Bene Gesserit, like for their own personal gain, to try and gain power, they plant these ideas that can then be manipulated to bring about by a charismatic leader like Paul, to bring about these horrible consequences. The whole thing is it's so tragic, but it's so it's perfectly kind of centered around that theme, and the whole movie kind of streamlined around that. And it's quite frightening when you watch it, and you're watching Paul as like, he's the protagonist, but he's not a good guy. And to see like, it's so frightening by the end, right?
Yeah. Like he's built up at the beginning as the hero,
the savior, right?
He is the hero. Yeah. He's the savior. And it's just like, he's going to be the one. And then we go down this movie, and he's driven by revenge, right? Like he wants revenge. And he knows all the stuff that's going on. And he has visions. He has different visions of the future. And after I think he drinks the worm, the water of life, the worm juice there, like it like refines his visions, and he sees
the water of life,
the war afterwards.
Yeah.
He sees what he's going to be able to do is cost the lives of millions or billions of people, I think he says, and like the great famines and all this. Like his future is actually looking pretty bleak. And I love that the movie, I mean, I don't want to say it's like super obvious. I think it should be almost a surprise for people near the end to see the degradation of the hero turning like kind of mad with power and like going beyond his original intentions. And we see that through Chani, where she's disgusted at the end. She does not bow to him. And it's like she walks away from him because we need that in there to be like, yeah, he's not going down a good road here. He's told her about the horrible things that are going to happen afterwards. And he's actively choosing to continue down that path, right? He didn't have to go become emperor, right? He's just like, he could have taken his revenge on the Baron. That's what he wanted. Revenge, to avenge his father's death, his murder. And it was just really well done. And it's kind of funny. I just want to tell a quick story here where this does come through in the book as well. Like obviously there's a lot more nuance and elements to the book. By the end of the book, you're like, man, Paul is a messed up dude. Like they're taking advantage of these people. Like they're doing bad things. I go to my local bookstore to buy Dune Messiah, the second book of the series. And I bring it up to the cash, and the guy's like, "Oh, you getting into Dune with the movie coming out and everything?" I'm like, "Yeah, I saw the movie. I tried reading the first Dune, but a story within a story. I found it a lot easier to read Dune after watching the movie because I could visualize the different actors. Like you said,
yeah, fair enough.
Timothée is like he's Paul Atreides.
Yeah,
it was
he
like
is.
so easy to just put him into every scene in the book, especially with the names and everything, because there's a lot of Arabic and Middle Eastern names used throughout Herbert's work there. But he's telling me, he's just like, are you prepared for this book? Like, are you prepared to go down the road? Because there's a lot of people who are like taken by surprise on like how things turn out. And I'm like, I don't think they're going to turn out good for Paul. And he's like, okay, so like, you have a sense of where things are going. I'm like, I hope so. I'm like, I'm not expecting Paul to be like Neo from the Matrix here. He's not going to save like the entire universe. I think he's going to throw the universe into some turmoil here.
Yeah.
And I love that. I just love that story. It's just like everything you talked before about that theme and whatnot. It's so well done. And I'm glad it's like, it's in here and it's present. And that's the thing that makes me so excited for the third one, is just like, how bad is it going to be? Like, who's the hero that's going to stand up against him later on? It's like, this could be a bleak story.
Yeah. I mean,
a good one.
I want to read a couple of quotes by Frank Herbert here. So it said, the bottom line of the Dune trilogy is beware of heroes. Much better to rely on your own judgment and your own mistakes. He also said, Dune was aimed at this whole idea of the infallible leader, because my view of history says that mistakes made by a leader or made in a leader's name are amplified by the numbers who follow without question. So this idea of, obviously he was a failed Messiah because he was a Messiah built on a lie. The prophecy was planted artificially by the Bene Gesserit, by more, not by divine intervention, but by more mundane political and power hungry machinations. But I like what you touched on with Chani, and one of the really smart things they did with her character was essentially made her like almost like the voice of reason or the voice of skepticism when everyone else was starting to believe in the myth of Paul Muad'Dib as the Messiah, as the chosen, the prophesied one who would lead them into freedom and reform Dune into a paradise. And she's the one who stands up and is like, no, like, I'm not going to bow down to him. He's obviously not a Messiah. He's just a regular dude.
Yeah.
And like all that kind of skepticism and doubt was actually in Paul's own mind in the novel, right? So he was constantly kind of at war with himself, deciding, do I follow this path, or do I, because he could see multiple different versions of the future depending on, if I make this choice, I can see this will happen. And so it was really smart because it's really tough to have that kind of internal dialogue in a movie in that medium. So to have Chani take on that role, that was really, really smart on the part of the filmmakers. And then have her, it was a huge departure at the end because in the book, he makes it clear that he's marrying the Princess Rulin, played by Florence Pugh, who does a great job with comparatively limited screen time. But it's clear in the book that when he marries the princess, he specifically tells her, "Is like, yeah, we're gonna be married in name only. Like, you're not gonna know my touch or my love. You're not gonna bear my children. I'm gonna take Chani as my concubine, and she'll be my wife in all but name." And it was a very, it was in the '60s. That probably made a lot of sense. But to have essentially, if you look at Dune Part 1 and Part 2 as one continuous story, to have it open with Chani's narration and close with Chani kind of writing out in defiance of what Paul has become, or in mourning of what Paul has become, to have her frame that story makes a whole lot more sense and gives a whole lot more weight to that character. So I think that was a really smart, one of the smart changes in this.
So good.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about that scene on Gady Prime with Fade Rautha Harkonnen?
Yeah.
The whole, I think that's one of the most visually stunning scenes. That's one of the ones that's getting a lot of attention just in terms of how visually stunning it is. But also, it's been a couple of years since I've read the first Dune book, but I don't remember Fade Rautha being as fleshed out in the books or in the book as he was in the movie. So I really appreciate them taking a little bit extra time and to show definitely. That I think what the movie does really well, really succinct storytelling, is showing how the Bene Gesserit are manipulating things behind the scenes, where it's like, oh yeah, they have, they wanted Jessica to bear a daughter so that he would marry Fade Rautha and they would produce the Kwisatz Haderach. That was the all-powerful being that the Bene Gesserit were trying to create so they could manipulate him for their own bidding. But then it showed okay, so they have the idea there's a quote or there's a recurring phrase in Dune where it's oh, there's plans within plans within plans.
Yeah.
But to show oh yeah, Fade Rautha, they give him the Gom Jabbar test at one point as well, a little bit later on, to show oh yeah, they were planning, they were manipulating bloodlines and getting different people to marry. It's they had different options to produce the Kwisatz Haderach. So setting Fade Rautha up is oh yeah, if Paul Muad'Dib or Paul Atreides, if he gets killed, it's well, we have this guy over here, but they probably have a dozen different potential candidates where they can breed out their Kwisatz Haderach, right? So it was really smart.
Yeah, that was a great payoff from the first one because she even mentions, I can't remember, it's the leader of the Bene Gesserit was just yeah, Mother we Gaius, have other things going on here just in case. And it's now it pays off here. We're going to focus on this guy and him getting the test. And you're this guy is he's a villain through and through. But I like that they establish what kind of person he is, and they immediately know his weaknesses so they can control him.
That was really cool.
When the Bene Gesserit, who's the character? She's not the Reverend Mother, the leader of the women there, who
Reverend Mother Gaius Mahayam.
Yeah, they effectively lose control. He is the
Kwisatz Haderach. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I'm not even going to
it's a weird
to try to pronounce that. He is that, and they lose control of Paul, right? It's just oh man, this is not good for us.
They're worse than
and I kind of it's there's that scene where they're about to duel and she's saying something and he just uses the voice on her to tell her to stop talking. And
it's so powerful, it knocks her back. I was oh my God.
It knocks her back. And I like the other guy's just he raises his eyebrows oh, this guy is good. This is not a power that you normally see because it's pretty much an all female group.
Bene Gesserit,
where it's just men don't usually have this ability. And this is why he's going against the thing. And it's this guy clearly wasn't being trained in the ways himself, I don't think. But
no,
I really like that part where it's it's not where Star Wars takes the Force and the Force influence speech there, whatever it's called. And it's I don't think in Star Wars you could use the voice against other people who are like equally as trained as you. But it's like here, it doesn't matter how good you are at the voice and like how much command you have. If someone uses it on you, you're following their command. It's just like, it takes you by surprise, and it's really effective throughout the movie. And when he uses it sparingly, it really hammers home to the audience. It's like, yeah, this guy is disrupting the Emperor's plans. He's disrupting the Harkonnens. He's going to upset the Bene Gesserit. Like, he is going off the rails into his own thing. And Lady Jessica gives a look. Rebecca Ferguson, great little acting there. She gives a look, is like, I did this. Yeah. Right.
Oh yeah. Like her whole thing is like, I love how like Paul's ascending. He's like the face of it, but like Lady Jessica is like the power behind the throne almost, right? She's like, yeah, no, like, Paul's still my son and I have influence over him. And so like, I'm essentially his right hand. Like you look at, you know, to borrow from the religions that modern day religions, you look at how much the Virgin Mary is venerated, the mother of Christ, right? She's held up almost as a deity unto herself. So it's like that. Yeah. It's like there, like when Frank Herbert was writing this, he pulled in specifically religious elements from modern day. So like that would not be lost on Lady Jessica. Sorry, going back to Gady Prime, I got us off on a tangent. That whole thing, the whole scene was done in black and white, and I don't think this was from the books at all, but the in-universe explanation in the movie seems to be like they have a black sun. I don't care if that makes sense or not. It looks so damn cool, especially when you see like there's scenes when like there's characters inside on Gady Prime and they start to walk outside and it's like goes from color to black and white as they go out into the harsh environment. It's like, this just looks so amazing.
I didn't confirm this, but apparently they filmed all those outdoor scenes in infrared vision, which gives it that really stark like black and white. Like we've become a little more familiar with that visual medium through like security cameras and stuff. And I've even seen it in my own home. I have a camera pointed at my front door inside, and there's a piece of like cloth on a speaker that's just in frame. It's black when you see it, but in infrared it's white, right? And that exactly as you're saying, like the people coming out in robes, like there are these black robes that come out into the outdoors. Now they're in that infrared or like the black sun, and the robes turn white. And it's just like, it's such a neat visual
maybe
effect.
That's why it felt almost like uncanny, right? It was almost unsettling watching the whole thing. It's like, oh yeah, there's something not quite right about this. And then the whole build up. So this scene was in the book, but I think they expanded on this a little bit more. And one of the big changes that people, I think one of the more controversial changes is that Thurfer Hawat, the mentat of the Atreides, he was completely excised from part 2 of this story, where in the original Dune novels he had a bit more going on, where he was working for their Harkonnens. He was kind of manipulated into working for them. Like he had poison and they would give him the antidote every day, but he was manipulating things behind the scenes. I think smartly for the movie, to keep things a bit more streamlined, a bit more tight, he was excised. There's so much cool stuff that they could have shown, but yeah, in this case, Fade Rautha, he would obviously, it was set up where he would like fight slaves, but they would be drugged ahead of time, so it wouldn't be much of a challenge. And in this case, I think in the books it was Thurfer Hawat who did this, but in the movie it was Baron Harkonnen. He sent one of the slaves out without being drugged, so he was like at full capacity. Yeah, and he says something about, was like, now like we'll get to see who he really is. And so he, like, Fade Rautha goes out there, played by, was it Austin Butler? Amazing job. I didn't really know this kid. I think his big breakout role was really Elvis Presley and with Elvis, like last year, the year before. I haven't really actually seen him. This is my first time seeing him. Phenomenal job. This kid's going places. He was sadistic, but also there was like a twisted sense of honor, where he was like, he defeats the first 2 drug slaves, no problem. But this last guy, one of the captured Atreides soldiers from the first movie, and he's like putting up more of a fight, and he looks up at his uncle, and he's like, and he decides he has the shields on, right, to protect himself. So he takes off the shield. So it's like, no, I'm gonna fight him. Like, no more advantages. Like, he's not poisoned, or he's not drugged up and slow. It's like, know what? I'm gonna take the shield up. I'm gonna prove myself against an equal opponent. And he goes and fights. And, I love Baron Harkonnen going back. It's like, there he is. He's like, oh, he revealed his true character. It's like, he's a psychopath. And I think I think the Bene Gesserit, when they're talking and they're plotting, they literally call him like, yeah, no, he's a sociopath. He's not right in the head, but he's got this weird twisted kind of sense of honor where it's like, no, I'm going to fight this battle and prove to everyone, maybe it's a sense of pride, maybe, and prove to everyone that's like, yeah, I earned this, right? It's not just because they're all drugged. I can hold my own in a real actual battle, right?
I do like that. Like the Baron, I think he talks to him afterwards. He's just like, that was your birthday gift right there. Like having him not drugged. Right?
I love that he was like super angry with it. It was like, he was like ready to kill his uncle. It's like, what are you doing? I go out there to have some fun, just killing some slaves. Yeah. What are you doing? Put me in real mortal danger.
And he makes him more of a legend. And I think, to your point of like improving his character, making him more like honorable and like he's following certain codes, even as twisted as he is. I believe in the book I read, in his duel with Paul, he ends up he like nicks him with like a poison blade at one point.
Oh, he tries he tries to cheat and hit him with a poison blade. Oh yeah,
exactly. And it's like in the movie version, no, there's no poison blades or anything. He legitimately tags him with a stab to the gut, and it's just Paul is just too good to like let that slow him down. But it makes him more honorable. It made him just like it's a little more tragic. It's like he's still a sociopath, but in their little world, the Harkonnen world, like he's still was an honorable guy to the end, essentially.
Yeah, I love that final battle too, where like Paul does like, may thy knife chip and shatter, and then he does the like, may thy knife chip and shatter. It's almost like he's discovered like, oh, that's interesting. I like that. I think I'll take that. Yeah. but the whole
was he mocking it or was he like embracing it?
I think it was like half and half, where he was like almost like he was gonna take it and twist it to his own twisted purposes. But the whole scene of Gady Prime and like the fireworks were almost like liquid fireworks in the sky.
Yeah, that was surreal.
The whole black and white sequence that was super amazing. And then of course was it Leah Seydoux playing Lady Fenrig, showing again like I think through a couple really quick, really efficient beats with the Bene Gesserit, just showing how they're manipulating things behind the scenes. In the books, they use their sexuality a lot to manipulate people. That was really shown really clearly, where she's like leading him to the bedroom. They do the Gom Jabbar test, and she also gets pregnant with his child right away. So it's like, we got the bloodline locked down. We're good to go. Yeah. But I love that whole scene where like she's in that corridor where she's not supposed to be, and he starts walking with her and talking. And all this, like, and the camera is like doing close-ups of them as they're kind of walking together, and then there's a shot where like they're outside her chamber, and he looks around and he doesn't know how he got there. I thought that was really cool. It's like, okay, she's manipulating him, either using the voice or using some kind of psychological trick where he doesn't even know like time and space. I was like, oh, it's like, okay, the Bene Gesserit, they got some tricks up their sleeves. Like that was a neat way to like show, don't tell, right? It's like, oh, that was the chef's kiss.
And it also, I mean, that scene too, where it's just like, oh yeah, like she's pregnant, she's got the bloodline going. In your mind after the movie's over, like Fade here, like he's dead, but like he has a kid coming who possibly wants revenge or something for a future installment to like continue. Because in the back of your head, you know, there's a lot of novel to source from. It's like there's a lot of characters. This kid is going to become a character at some point as well.
Or not, who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
Lots can happen in 15 years. There's a 15-year time jump between Dune and Dune Messiah. So
that was one of the other things, is that when I was reading the book years ago and I'm watching the movie, I'm like, I'm pretty sure a lot of time passed in the book. And I was kind of verified myself afterwards. Like, I think 2 or 3 years passed at least before he started taking on like the training of the Fremen, and they started going out on like the raids against the Harkonnen, so like the spice harvesters.
That was another major change from the books to the movies, and it bears some commentary, because in the book there's a 2-year time jump, during which time obviously Lady Jessica is established to be pregnant, so she has she bears Paul's sister in that time in the books, Aaliyah. And then also, I've forgotten about this, but Paul and Chani actually had a son originally, who was then killed before they'd go on their raid of Arakeen when the Emperor shows up. I think it was smart for them not to do it, because one of the big changes from the book to the movie was that Aaliyah, by the end of the movie still hasn't been born. Aaliyah is Paul's sister. In the movie, she's still unborn. I think it was really, really smart decision not to have her born because I just watched the 1984 version of Dune, and to have a 2-year-old character running around behaving like an adult. Spoiler alert, in the books, Aaliyah at 2 years old, the tender age of 2 years old, she murders the Baron Harkonnen to get revenge.
Yeah, she's like, and that's where it gets like kind of weird because like she's super advanced, like age, like physically and everything, and mentally because of the water of life that she was exposed to during the pregnancy, and it's like probably a wise move to get rid of that stuff.
Yeah, in the books, it's super messed up because she gets full adult consciousness and awareness as a fetus in the womb, which psychologically that's going to scar anybody. Plus, you got 1,000 generations of memories you have access to through that whole process of becoming a reverend mother.
It was enough that they were able to communicate, like just talk to each other in the movie. It's
Lady
like
Jessica and Aaliyah.
Yeah.
It was. I thought that was like they got across the essence of the character. Was like, this character is not right. It's super creepy having Lady Jessica literally talking to her fetus, her unborn daughter, this whole time, and then we get that really awesome surprise. I didn't look up the cast beforehand, so like it was a super surprise when they did this like flash forward.
Uncredited.
Anya Taylor-Joy, spoilers, shows up as a future version of Aaliyah. That I think Paul has a vision of the future, and she's telling him like, "Yeah, I love you, brother, and like you're doing the right thing." And for those, I don't want to spoil everything for people who haven't yet read like Dune Messiah and that stuff. But Aaliyah plays a huge role in Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. There's a huge role for her to play, so it'll be, even if it's just Dune Messiah, that's going to be awesome to see her if they do this and Anya Taylor-Joy is back. It's amazing. But they captured the essence of Aaliyah really as this. To use the Dune speak, and I think they bring up this word at one point, abomination, where she's like, yeah, it's not natural for this fetus. It's not healthy for this fetus to have full adult awareness, to have the memories of 1,000 generations, and to be not yet even born. That has some serious psychological side effects later on, and to have Lady Jessica creepily talking to her womb about how they're going to manipulate convert the unbelievers, at one point in the movie, and her walking back and forth talking to her. Like there's conversations where like Paul is talking to Jessica, and Jessica's like, "Oh yeah, your sister doesn't think you should do this, or your sister thinks you should come south with us, to the stronghold of the Fremen true believers." And it's this weird back and forth. It's like it's super eerie and it's super weird. There's a couple shots of the fetus in the womb, and I think it gets across the essence of the character of Aaliyah without going. I don't think even if you had CGI, even if you had the best child actor in the world, I don't think there's an uncanny valley. I think there's something about psychologically human, or something about human psychology where you just cannot cross that border where you have a toddler behaving and talking like an adult, and it would take you out of the movie. I think it works in a comedic setting. Right, I think you could play for comedy, but for like in a more grounded, realistic take, like there's no amount of CGI, there's no amount of 2-year-old actors out there, the quality of 2-year-old actors that could pull this off and make it, and not pull you completely out of the story and have them going around murdering people and doing stuff. It was like I thought it was a perfect way to encapsulate Aaliyah, and then have Paul in the movie version, he's the one who kills Baron Harkonnen. After I think it was a perfect kind of, it did some like narrative symmetry where he gets revenge for the death of his father, and I love that when he kills Baron Harkonnen and is like, yeah, hi, he's like, hi grandfather, is like, yeah, you're gonna die like an animal. It was like so cold and so harsh. It's like, oh my god,
that was one of the big. Right, that was one of the big reveals at the end, which I kind of forgot about for the book, is that Lady Jessica is the Baron's daughter.
Yeah,
and this becomes knowledge to her. She didn't know until that moment when she drank the water of life that gives her like all this knowledge. But that was kind of surreal, seeing that. Were there any other things that sort of like took you by surprise in the movie? Like that one took me by surprise, but just because I didn't remember from the book.
It's funny because they mention it so much, and it comes into play huge. That combined heritage comes into play in Dune Messiah and Children of Dune especially, but I hadn't thought about it. So when he said it again, it's like, oh yeah, that's right. There was that kind of complication to where these two great houses. Obviously, they were again. It was to show that manipulation by the Bene Gesserit. They were controlling the bloodlines and deciding who was marrying who behind the scenes, kind of like without people even knowing that they were being manipulated. It's a great way to show that. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, I think the destruction of Siege Tabor. I don't think that happened in the book, but in the movie,
I was reading in the book. They like basically. I don't think they destroyed it entirely. Right? They raid it, and like they're inside, and it's like there might be a like mass murder happening, or they control it, right? It was just like
some light treason, as they would say in the rest
just
of
some light war crimes.
Some light war crimes, Yeah.
But yeah, seeing that destruction on screen was like, oh my God, because
it really raised
the movie,
stakes.
like it focuses on, this is a pool of water. This is really the only like reservoir of water that we really see until that moment. It was just like, oh, this is only like, this is the dead's water. Like this is their water returned to us. Right. And it's like, nobody drinks from this. And then seeing it destroyed like that later on was like, oof, like that had an extra impact, I think, when you watch it.
I mean, to them, to the Fremen who live on this desert planet, who live such this really kind of, when you think about like a really pathetic life, pathetic in the sense of pathos, not in the sense of being, but like to have to recycle their own sweat and urine just to survive, and living in such squalid conditions. And then to see like, yeah, there are desert people. They value water more than anything else. And they're saving up that water because they have this dream of essentially using that water to terraform their planet. And it's like, to see what water meant to them, to see like Siege Tabor, where you had like, that was Stilgar's home and Chani's home, and it becomes Paul and Jessica's home, and to see that destroyed, I think that was a great way to really up the stakes in the movie in a really visual format where you see like, oh yeah, you see the explosions, you see, oh yeah, like this is where we spent most of the time with most of our main characters, and to have their home destroyed, it was a really great way visually of showing, how they were upping the stakes, or what the motivation for the main characters was, right?
I gotta talk about Dave Bautista's character here for a few moments.
The Beast
Rabban, right?
The Beast.
Yeah, he was in this one surprised me. He was in it a little more than I thought he was going to be, and I thought he was a little more nuanced in this one because, like, presumably, like I'm watching this and like they're launching their attacks against the Harkonnens and their spice production, and it's like in my mind years are passing. I don't know if that's actually happening in the movie or not, but
it's really like 9 months or something, right?
Like he sends out like groups of people to sort of like fight the Fremen, but it's kind of half-hearted when the later plans are revealed. It's like the Baron finds out and it's just like, oh, I'm gonna send in Fade here later, and his first move is like just launching, like just destroying an entire mountain, right? It's just like with all these missiles, you're like, Rabban could have done this the entire time, but chose not to. And there's like this element where he's like, I think this Baron guy might actually be going a bit too far. It's like, there might be some earned respect.
I think this Baron guy might not be on the up and up. I don't know.
Well, my uncle might be a little crazy, but he's super, like, he's a little unhinged himself. But there must be some earned respect there for the Fremen people. And like, part of it, I mean, is the arrogance of the Harkonnen who don't even believe that there's that many Fremen. But like, he's been fighting them for years now and not really using any real strategy. And then he actually gets down on the ground with his troops and they're just taken out so easily. And he just turns tail and starts running. It's like, oh yeah, this guy, like
he's all bluster. Well, it was really interesting how they set him up. Like he's almost like the blunt object. He's like a hammer, and then Fade Rautha was really like the scalpel. It's like he's competent. He can get the job done. Where like Rabban is never set up as a leader. I think in the books, I could be mistaken, but I think it was part of the Baron's plan is like send Rabban as an incompetent leader.
Yes.
And then later on you send Fade Rautha in, and he's almost like, because he's competent, then he's like almost a savior of the people and lifted up. So I think in the books that was made more explicit. I think rightfully so in the movies, they were focused on the theme of, Paul's journey of becoming this tyrant. Again, using the words of Dune, tyrant becomes especially important later on. Focusing on that as opposed to some of the, trimming some of these kind of side branches and really, having Rabban be there to show is like, oh yeah, this guy is he's a beast. He's an animal. He only knows his violence. But then like Fade-Rotha comes in, and Fade-Rotha is a master of both violence, but also kind of manipulation, and he's intelligent. And like that scene where he like knocks Raban to the ground and is like, "Kiss my boot."
Yeah.
Brother is like, it just shows like Raban is like built up to be this big tough guy, and he runs from fights. He is servile to his brother. He's like, there's a big build. I love how there's a big build up. I think maybe other people might have found it anticlimactic, but there's a big build up. Like when Gurney Halleck comes back and they're doing the raid on the capital, Arrakeen, and he meets up with Raban. It's like, oh, Gurney Halleck back from the dead. He thinks there's gonna be this big blowout fight, and it's like Gurney just takes this guy down.
Yeah,
it's like no problem. It's like, I love that he was built up to be this big machine. It's like, no, it was all hype, and he was like, it was all overblown. I also too love talking about Dave Bautista. And why he's my favorite of the wrestler turned actors is because can you imagine someone like The Rock allowing his character to be forced to the ground and kiss somebody else's boot, or to be killed off in like 2 seconds? No, because Dave Bautista is there. He's there to he's there to do what the character needs and what the story needs. He doesn't like, there's no trace of ego there, right? Where he's like, no, my character is going to be a servile coward who kisses his brother's boots, it doesn't fight back, and then loses a fight against his bitter rival in 3 seconds. Like I think that speaks to like Dave Bautista's ability as a collaborator, which I think if you're working in movies as an actor in front of or behind the camera, you have to be a collaborator. And to me, that just shows like he's got no ego, right? He just goes and does what the character needs and does what the movie needs. And it was so great to see, like, I love that there's like subversion of expectations where like expect Raban to be big, the big boss. Was like, he's not even like a mid-level boss. He's just a regular goon, right? He's just who happened to, it's nepotism. He happened to be born in the right family, right?
And there's a scene where it's outside the Baron's, his little oil chamber of healing.
The oil chamber of healing.
Raban is going up, and you hear the screams of the Baron's like assistants being murdered inside.
Yeah.
And he just sort of looks at the guards, and it's just like, it's those little looks here and there. That's like, that acting really comes through. And it's just like, oh yeah, this guy is a true psycho in here. And
also,
I gotta go deal with him.
Also, I got to shout out to the real heroes of the story, the HR department of the Harkonnen regime, because to deal with the amount of just random deaths, like, because they were just like,
well, Fade is like, he gets a knife, he tests the point of it on his tongue, and then he tests like the long blade part by just killing whoever's standing next to him. It's just like, man,
you gotta give it to the Harkonnen human resources department. They're probably working overtime to deal with all these incidents.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
That's a movie I want to see.
Incredible. Just incredible.
Yeah, there's one other change that I really liked in the movie version. Had to do with the Fremen, where it was shown in Dune Part Two, where the southern Fremen and the northern Fremen tribes, they were kind of different in terms of their culture, in terms of their religious beliefs. Where the southern Fremen tribes are really hardcore into the religious beliefs of the Messiah and all the prophecy. And the northern tribes were a bit more skeptical, and they didn't buy into necessarily all the Lisan el-Gaib or the Messiah prophecies as much. And I thought that was such a great idea, because that wasn't in the books at all. In the books, the Fremen culture is a lot more monolithic, and they're just there, and like they all kind of believe and do the same thing all the time. So to see that also is kind of neat to see, like the young Fremen, they were talking about, like, what are you talking about? Like the Messiah, it's all made up. It's nonsense. And see, like the older Fremen is like, hey, show some respect. Like, like Muad'Dib is the Messiah. Like, you got to believe, like, it's important. Like, don't interrupt my prayers. I'm trying to pray here. See, like, the difference between old and young, to see the difference between, like, oh, the North, they believe this, and the South, they believe this. And just gives that a bit more color and a bit more, like, they felt like an actual, a real group of people, a real society. Where like, oh yeah, they're not all monolithic. They're not just like a bunch of, like, a colony of ants who just like follow the leader. It's like, they're individual tribes and individual sieches, and the younger generation is going to be more skeptical of stuff the older generation believes. It's like, oh yeah, it made them feel like a real people, like more fully fleshed out in a way that you never really got that sense in the book. So that was a really, like, a subtle change, but a really, really effective change in building up the character of the Fremen. Really, really really enjoyed that. It was a really great decision.
Another little scene that I enjoyed was the baby worm. That one caught me by surprise. I don't remember it from the book, but I was just like, what is this little thing? And it's just like the little tiny sandworm comes out, and then they extract the juices from him, that blue Gatorade from him. It's just like
never look at blue Gatorade the same after this movie.
Yeah. But it was also like, I don't know. I like that. It's like we have his little sand home here, and then we have his water tomb. It's just like, we're going to drown the worm. It's like, these things can be killed. You know, they got to be pretty tiny. Which kind of brings us into like the main centerpiece, the action finale.
Oh,
the
yeah. Assault on Arrakeen.
What were they even attacking? I mean, I know it was the Emperor's ship. Like, was it?
Well, it was the entire, it was like Arrakeen, which was the capital of Arrakis, aka Dune. But essentially, like, it's described in the, it was also cool too, because sometimes descriptions of geography in books can be a little bit kind of amorphous, and I can't always visualize it. But the shield wall was essentially a mountain range that protected Arrakeen from the worms, right? The worms couldn't go through it because it was a mountain range, and the mountain range, like, there was sheer rock down through it. So it was, they were attacking the capital where the Harkonnens had set up. That's where the Emperor had come and brought his gold ship there.
His chrome ship.
It was chrome, yeah. That was great. Yeah. That was a great shot too. With the chrome ship comes along, and like the landscape was reflecting on the bottom. It was like, oh my god, that was amazing. So so they had to use the family atomics from like the Atreides family atomics, blow up the shield. Essentially, they're blowing up a hole in a mountain range.
Okay, but I was a bit lost there, because for some reason I was thinking about the books where they literally like launch their lasers at the shield wall to like blow it up, creating those like atomic blasts. But in the movie, and maybe in the book as well, like they just straight up use the atomics that every house has stored.
Well, I think the reason that it wouldn't use, because I love how it's perfectly balanced in the books, where it's like you have personal shields that can protect you against projectiles, and then you have lasers. Like, okay, lasers, but then lasers hitting a shield will create like potentially create like an atomic level explosion, but that explosion can happen anywhere along the path of that laser. So it could happen closer to the shield. It could happen closer to the laser. So that's why you don't see, or you see lasers being used judiciously throughout the movie. They'll just go all willy nilly, because like you could create atomic explosion right in your face. So that's the reason why they don't do that, even though they know that causes the explosion. So there's a perfect, really logical explanation in the books why this, or in the world building of Dune, why they use the atomics and not the shield laser explosion. That was me nerding out for 30 seconds on that.
That's what this podcast is right now.
Actually, Brian.
Well, no, I was legitimately confused, like not confused, but it's like, I remember a big explosion in the movie, and I was like, did they use the atomics there? Yeah. It's like, I thought I remembered lasers in the book, and it's just like, it all comes together. It all makes sense now. Yeah. That was why I need to go watch it a second time.
They blow the hole in the shield wall. Essentially, they're blowing a hole in the mountain range using atomics, and then that allows for the army riding on the backs of sandworms and stuff to get through, which was to see the sandworms in all their glory. Oh my god!
I loved. You can even see it in the trailer there, where it's like the 3 sandworms come out of like the dust storm, and the Sardaukar, who are like the elite army. We focus on like 20 or 30 of them in the frame, and like some of them just turn around and start running. Like another guy in the frame, he's holding his sword like, I'm gonna fight a worm today. It's just like he's not giving up, and they just get consumed and just like.
Well, I love how the Sardaukar were still built up. They're still built with these great warriors. Right, the Sardaukar were the Emperor's, special elite troops. I love how, like, after the explosion of the shield wall, and all the boulders are coming down, like the pieces of the mountain are coming down, crushing people. I love how, like, it shows them getting back up and reforming their lines again. It's like, okay, they are disciplined. These guys are hardcore. Like, they're not going to let a little thing like an exploding mountain stop them. And even when the worms come, it's like, it's an atomic blast. How much radiation could that be? No problem. And the worms come, and a couple of them run, but they still like hold their lines. Like, okay, the Sardaukar, they're a legitimate threat. They're a legitimate enemy. They're not just going to roll over. They're not a bunch of stormtroopers who are just going to be like fall down in one shot. It's like, they are a legitimate threat. That was really cool to show the Sardaukars, like, they're living up to their reputation, right?
Man, that, I mean, it was bonkers. But there's one more thing I wanted to mention. They do ride the worms. We get to see that. It's pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, I was going to bring that up.
We do not get to see anybody get off of a worm. So I kind of want to know, because they when Lady Jessica is going down south, she's got a tent on top of the worm. We got 30 people riding on a worm. Like, this thing can transport lots of people. It's huge. We don't get to see how they get off of the worm. Like, is the worm always in motion? Is it like a horse? Can you bring it to a stop?
Yeah, I think
these worms are pretty like violent and aggressive, right?
they can be. So I think, first of all, when Paul goes out to do his final trial and ride the worm, that whole scene from him putting the thumper in and the worm coming across, and like Stilgar, like, it's like little comedic things like, oh no, not that big. It's like, like the biggest worm anybody ever seen. And like it comes to the dune, and he's like falling down with the sand as it goes through a dune, and he's like getting the hooks into the worm's like segmented body there. The whole scene was like, even though they kind of showed that a little bit in the trailers, like, it was still one of those scenes, like, to see it on the big screen was just amazing. But to your point, they can actually bring worms to a stop. Okay. They show it in other books. I don't know if they talk about it in the first book. I just know because other books are more recent in my mind. Yeah. So they can bring them to a stop. But even because what they're doing is when they pull up it's like a bunch of ridges, and they expose,
preventing it from like going into the sand.
They expose, right? Like, there's a softer kind of underbelly, I guess, of like the sandworm doesn't want sand getting into all its like soft pink fleshy parts. But if you pull up one side more than the other, it'll turn to a certain direction, and you can actually they can stop them. What they can do is pull up beside. My theory was, like, you see, like when Paul gets on he's standing on top of a dune, and the sandworm he's using geography to his advantage. So my thought was to get like the baskets on top and stuff when they come to a stop is like, oh, they pull up beside like a big dune, and they just like kind of unload there. So it's like almost like an airport unloading zone. It's like, use the geography.
Sand port, yeah.
Use your sand port. Use the geography to your advantage, right? It's like you pull up beside a nice dune, get everybody and their luggage offloaded, and then deal with like Fremen customs, and which I assume there's going to be a couple deaths going through Fremen customs at least, or a couple duels to the death probably. A couple duels. They do enjoy their duels to the death.
I mean, the entire the Emperor, Paul challenged him to a duel to the death to take the throne,
as one will.
And Fade, volunteer, be like, I'll be your champion.
That's
just like,
I mean, that's how I got my promotion at work. I challenged my boss to a duel, and I defeated him, and then I took his position in his corner office. I mean, isn't that how you do it at your job, Brian? Duel to the death. Like, that's just.
Oh my goodness. There's one thing I wanted to see was like, because I think they gift Lady Jessica one of the crysknives, which is like one of the teeth of the worms.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wanted to see more of that, and I think there's more discussion of it in the books.
Yes, there
is.
I
wanted to see like Paul pull out like his crysknife. That's like really sweet, and I wanted to see that thing cut other knives in half.
Well, is he using? I can't remember. Is he using a crysknife in the final duel with Fade-Rotha there?
It wasn't clear to me, and I think that's where it's just like, oh, I need to see more of these. I don't think they even mentioned the name. Yeah, you don't really see him again afterwards, but it's like, it's just little. But man, so freaking epic.
Yeah, so much stuff going. Another thing I'm glad they left out was in the books, after he kills Jamis, which happened at the beginning of the first movie. It goes into a whole thing where Paul inherited Jamis's wife and family afterwards.
I remember that. Yeah,
I'm glad they left that out. That again, that was like a product of its time. It feels like we're obviously patriarchal society, and it's like, oh yeah, and I think Frank Herbert was kind of pulling on kind of older tribal traditions. But I'm glad they got rid of that. We kind of awkward.
Even Paul's legitimate child with Chani is killed before they do their main raid. And I remember reading the book, and it was like Paul had already become like kind of unhinged at that point. And as I recall, he didn't really care that much that his kid had been killed.
He seems very, just like, in the books, he seems very callous. Like Chani is stricken with grief, and Lady Jessica has to comfort her. Yeah, they're a lot more like Lady Jessica's a lot more like a lot closer to Chani in the books. They're not BFFs, but they're not as antagonistic as they are in the movies. A great choice in the movies, by the way. But yeah, like by that point, like you can see like Paul is already becoming kind of power mad in the books. But it also clears up because he's Leto the second, but then they have twins later on, and a boy and a girl who is also the boy's also named Leto the second. So it's like I think that they were smart to clear that up. It's like there's only one Leto the second now.
Yeah. That's pretty fair. Oh man, is there anything else we want to throw out there before we get into ratings here?
No, I think we covered kind of all the major points. It was just a couple points just really gave me chills when Paul Muad'Dib was doing his when he finally embraced the role of Lisan Al Gaib. He embraced the role of savior, of Messiah. Like there were chills kind of running down my spine when that final battle, like when the atomics blew up the mountain and then the sandworms coming through. Chills. That final duel, when like perfectly silhouetted against the sun in that room, and there was no music playing. I think for the whole fight, there's no soundtrack. It was just the sound of them fighting. Literally getting chills, even though I knew how it ended, even though Paul knew how it ended.
Yeah.
It was like a credit to Denis Villeneuve as a storyteller to like build that tension into somebody. Like we know one of the guys can see the future and how everything ends.
And he's shown us the future. He's shown us his visions, and they tell us, oh, I just drank the water of the worm here, and now I can see with like perfect clarity. We see the future. Paul's there. He's doing things. And to have that fight, I think this is the point you're getting to.
Yeah.
It was just like, still have that tension, especially when he first gets stabbed. You're like, oh, maybe the future could be changed.
Maybe he was overconfident. Yeah. Or maybe, it was like, how much are they going to deviate from the book? I was like, it was really cool. But that was also a nice callback to the first movie where he gets the better of Gurney Halleck when they're dueling, practice dueling. But then he's like, oh yeah, look down. It's like, oh yeah, you would have joined me in death. So it's almost like, oh yeah, like he's taking advantage of obviously Fade Rautha's like his pride, as the Bene Gesserit said, and his arrogance. But also it's like a nice callback to the first movie. So really, really well done. But like everything in the movie, like all the things that were cut, like the there's so much thematically going on, like with their distrust of technology and the world building. We talked about the Butlerian jihad, which is essentially purging like anything but the most basic of computing devices. And that's why they have mentats, essentially human computers. That would have been cool to see, but I understand why they got rid of that part of the story, because that was kind of tangential to the main underlying theme of the dangers of the charismatic leader.
And Paul was being trained as a mentat in his youth. Yeah,
that's the whole thing. Like Paul was like, he was a mentat. He was the duke of like one of the most powerful families. He was the leader of he became the leader of the Fremen, a messianic figure. So he had like, political, intellectual, religious powers all united into one under a charismatic leader. And like, you see what happens. That final order he gives to the Fremen, I think, what does he say? Lead them to paradise.
Yeah.
Such a chilling line, especially you look at modern history and you look at some of these religious beliefs of some of the terrorist acts that we've seen. Those beliefs about, if I die, the service of my religion, I'll go to paradise with 92 virgins or whatever it is. So like that whole thing, lead them to paradise, is such like an Orwellian kind of line of like, oh yeah, they're going to lead them to paradise. All right. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's like, yeah. And to see Stilgar at the end, and he's like, screaming as he gets on the ship, to see Stilgar completely enveloped by that religious zealotry and by this holy mission. It was something smart where they showed specifically, I think in the ending of the first Dune book, they don't specifically show the jihad. I think they make mention of it, but to show like this movie ends like they're clearly going out to start their holy war, and this jihad, this crusade is like, oh yeah, this is Paul Muad'Dib, he's the protagonist. He is not the good guy, right? All of a sudden is like the reality of what has happened fully comes home, to see these Stilgar and the other Fremen caught up in that fanaticism, going off to wage war. Is like, this is some really dark dark stuff, especially considering, modern history. I mean, really all of human history, but, modern history in the past, 20, past quarter century, really. It's an incredibly poignant, prescient, frightening scene. Powerful scene. We talk about like cerebral sci-fi. It's incredibly powerful. But yeah, Denis Villeneuve was absolutely right. I think the choices he made to like trim Aaliyah, or hint at Aaliyah, trim some of the Mentat stuff, trim some of the characters. I know there was like Lady Fenrig was in there, Lord Fenrig. I think Tim Blake Nelson, actually filmed scenes as Lord Fenrig, but he got cut, probably rightfully so, for pacing. There was it was really, really incredibly well done. Like, to me, Dune 1 and Dune 2 form a single movie in my mind. And I'm so glad we have both these movies now to tell this whole story. And, for an unfilmable novel, I think Denis Villeneuve made an impressive counterpoint to show how it can actually be filmed and be filmed well.
That's one of the interesting things. The history of trying to adapt Dune is almost like its own myth where, I think they tried to make a series out of it before David Lynch's Dune, Jodorowsky's Dune, I think.
Yes. That was the most legendary failure. Yeah.
Yeah. The budget blew out of proportion. I don't know the full detail. We get David Lynch's Dune. He disowns the project afterwards. He doesn't like it. But it gets like a cult following. It's like it has its charms. Yeah,
there were a couple of made for TV, there were a couple of miniseries. I think
that's right.
Dune and Children of Dune back in the early 2000s. What I didn't know about. I got to look these up now and track them down.
And you think, this actually, if it's unfilmable as a movie, let's try it as a TV series. And even now, when you're reading about it, it's like Villeneuve says he will definitely do like a part 3. It'll be his trilogy. But they also mentioned a TV series as well that may expand beyond the original trilogy to sort of continue the story. And I think they're calling it Dune Prophecy right now. But there's been different TV adaptations. Cool. And it's just like there's a lot of Dune out there. And it's really neat it's an awesome time to be a fan, and having a lot of people pulled in for just the uncomparable quality of this adaptation. The changes they made is just it makes so much sense for the format, the medium. It's just for the story, the characters, everything works so well in this movie. It's awesome. And I don't know, it's really neat to go back and experience the books again.
Yes.
And, I'll definitely be continuing to read them. I have to start up Dune Messiah next, maybe.
Awesome.
And get through Children of Dune 2 before the inevitable third film comes out.
I really hope that's going to come to fruition. And I understand, there is some reticence, I think, among fans even of trying to film some of the later Dune books, especially something like God Emperor of Dune, where things get A, really weird, but also B, it's mostly just people sitting in rooms talking about philosophies of power and religion and society. And it's doesn't maybe lend itself well cinematically, but I mean, one of the first thoughts I had was, there's just so much content and so much ground to cover, in my mind, Dune makes perfect sense as a Game of Thrones style TV show, right? Where you can really delve into the mythology, and it was this incredibly large and fleshed out cast of characters that you can go into. You can spend whole episodes with, Gurney Halleck or Thurfer Hawat and all these different people. I would honestly, now that I've gotten the movies, I love the movies. I love the books. To see what they do, to see how they would do this in really high budget TV show that. We're still living, I think, in a golden age of TV. And to see with there's even ongoing Game of Thrones series. They're still popular, still really well done. So to see a Dune style TV show and that same level of quality and that same kind of level of care, I think it would work really well in terms of telling that, unpacking all that stuff in Dune. There's so much to unpack in Dune. You could have this run for 20 seasons and still not cover everything in Dune. It is to the credit of critics. Dune is an incredibly dense book. when you start reading it, there's so much to be said. So the fact that, we got not just one movie so far, but like 3 movies made of this, and 2 of them were amazing. And the other one was pretty good in its own right. I'm not gonna like the not David Fincher. that'd be a hell of a Dune adaptation, David Lynch version. Got some eccentricities, but it was still, I had a good time watching it. I think we're incredibly lucky that we were able to see these adaptations and have them be as good as they are.
Do you want to do ratings, or are we good with that?
Yeah, I think people might be able to guess what we might rate this. But yeah, we can do ratings, I guess.
Yeah, so just a reminder, we use a 5-star rating system with a possible like bonus on top. Yeah, I think I know what your rating is. But hit me with it, please.
Yeah, Dune Part 2 is obviously 5-star rating. I think considering both Dunes together, I would give it 5 stars with the heart. I might give Dune 2 alone 5 stars with the heart, maybe. But in my mind, I feel like 2 parts of one single story. But yeah, an easy 5 stars and a heck of a way to start off really my 2024 film watching. It's like that was the first 2024 film I watched. So it's gonna be, I don't want to say all downhill from here, but it's gonna be
it'll be tough to maintain. Act to follow.
Yeah, it's a tough act to follow for the rest of the year. How about you, Brian? What was your rating on Dune Part 2?
Oddly enough, I think when I was first logging it, I gave it 5 stars. And then I was like, you know what? I think maybe 4.5 is more appropriate. That's why I recorded it as. Okay. I don't know why. I honestly don't know. And I knew this was coming. We talked about it for this length of time. I'm loving it. Like I'm really looking forward to going out and seeing this again. It's a 5-star film. The first film I also gave 4.5 because, as we talked about before, it was like it felt like just half a movie, but no, it's 5 stars too.
Yeah, no,
it's 10 stars for 2 parts.
Yes,
2 like bonuses on top of all that.
I'd have to agree.
There's no reason to rate it any lower. This was just
I think it's just being nitpicky and being like, I'm always reticent to rate things like 100% the first time I see them, like movies. That is, I always want to get things time to gestate, but like, it's been a week since I've seen Dune Part 2, and like those first couple of days, I was gonna watch another movie the same night, but I couldn't bring myself to watch another movie. Like I was still like overwhelmed, just my brain was still it took like 2 or 3 days to process everything I've seen on the screen. Like very few movies have that impact on me where I'm just like I'm in awe days, weeks after. But even like, a week later, it's still pretty soon after watching it, but like it's enough time for like the hype factor to have died down, and I'm still loving this movie. So I think, to call this early in the game a 5 stars or a 6 out of 5, I think I'm comfortable with that.
That's pretty fair. Incredible.
Okay. You're not going to do...
Is that a wrap?
Do you want to do the ratings across the globe?
Ratings across the globe. Yeah, I almost forgot about that. They're pretty high. Well, I shouldn't even give you a hint at what they are, but IMDb uses 10 stars. So what do you think is the average IMDb user rating for Dune Part 2?
8.7.
Very close. It's 8.9 at the
super.
At the time of recording. I mean, it could fluctuate, but that's really high for IMDb.
Super high, yeah. Surprised.
Rotten Tomato, they use a percentage, so 0 to 100. Critic and audience, what do you think their ratings have landed at?
Critics, I'm gonna say, I'll say 89, and then audience 93.
Close, but you gotta go higher at 93% critic and 95% audience.
Oh wow.
This is a huge movie. And Letterboxd, which is basically our platform of choice. That's where you can find our profiles and all our ratings. They also use the 5-star system. What do you think a Letterboxd average user rating is?
4.3.
4.6.
What? Oh my God.
4.6. And if you go to the Letterboxd page, this is ranked number 6 amongst the Letterboxd top 250 films of all time. So take that however you will.
I think there's going to be some shifting of that as it goes through. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
It's always, there's definitely recency bias.
Yeah, 100%.
For a lot of that stuff.
I'm speaking as a huge fan of the film, and I still think it's like, okay, that seems pretty high for a movie that's only been out in 2 weeks.
Yeah, pretty incredible though.
Yeah,
but yeah, what a treat. I mean, I couldn't summarize it any better than you have already. I mean, it's just like, what a time to be alive. What a time to be a movie lover.
Oh yeah.
Like, if you're into sci-fi at all, and based on all those ratings, like the audience rating and whatnot, it's like, I think non-sci-fi fans can enjoy this, because there's sci-fi elements to it, but it, as we mentioned before, it's like there's no computers, there's no crazy technology happening here. There's giant sandworms, there's sword fighting, there's stuff going on.
It's a lot more about the human relationships and the personal journeys of the characters than about, there is crazy technology and world building, but it's all kind of behind the scenes, and it's not, you could set this story on planet Earth in modern day and with a few minor changes, like the political landscape and everything, but like it's about the character journeys and the character development. So like, yeah, it's at once, like, it's obviously like a huge blockbuster action movie, but it's an incredibly intimate movie. And it really, like, if you look back through Denis Villeneuve's filmography, you can see like all his stories, like you get the sense that these are all personal stories to him, going all the way back to like Polytechnique, and then like Incendie, and even more recent stuff like Enemy and Prisoners, or not Prison. Is it Prisoners or Prisoner? I just lost all my street cred as a Denis Villeneuve fan. But yeah, like to see that, like there's always like this intimacy to a Denis Villeneuve movie, even something like Blade Runner 2049, probably better analog. It's like big budget sci-fi, crazy technology, but the story is always about the characters and the character journeys and what's going on, like their internal kind of, where they end up, point A to point B, how they grow or how they fail, their triumphs and their tragedies. And so I think that's super accessible to really anybody, whether you're a fan of sci-fi or not. That it's about the characters, and like Denis Villeneuve understands that, and it comes across, and yeah, that's what makes it accessible, I think.
As always, we appreciate you hanging out with us today and taking the time to listen to our podcast. You can find us online over at realfilmchronicles.com, where we have not just a repository of podcast episodes, but many of our written reviews as well. If you're up to it, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram as well. All the links should be within the show notes here. So until next time, take care of yourself and others, and be sure to enjoy your film journey.